I'm going to begin my talk on the burden of shame with one family's story, then tease out the faith fractures that are in that story. Finally, we'll focus on how shame relates to faith fractures and how those fractures may find healing. Here's the story. It's a young couple longing for a child. They had prayed for a child. They had sought medical assistance to have a child. Finally, they decided they would go for an adoptive process. They learned of a private adoption through someone in their faith community. After more prayer and legal consultation, they moved through with the process. The baby girl was a month old when she came to them. She was healthy, but thin. The adoptive parents were told that the needs of the baby were only minimally met, for the mother was planning to give the baby up. So the bottle was propped on the side of the makeshift cradle. Cuddling and holding were avoided. There had been very little touch or comfort for this child. The adoptive parents tried to bond with this new baby the way they knew how, by cuddling the baby, holding the baby for feeding. When the baby screamed louder and louder, they were so confused. The parents settled into an uneasy rhythm of jumping to meet the infant's needs quickly and yet for more distance than they were comfortable. They found themselves propping her bottle themselves and playing beside her on the floor instead of holding her and rocking her. They taught the family and the close friends and the faith community, the ladies in the nursery, no, this baby doesn't want to be held. Just put her down. She'll figure it out. They wondered, what is so difficult about this child? The baby thrived under their attentive care, meeting developmental milestones of crawling and walking and running and talking all early. In the potty training process, she did begin to settle into this withholding, but still insisting on those big girl panties, setting up the stage for a lot of messes. There could be no choice within limits for this toddler, which often helps a preschooler. She would consistently battle for choices outside of the limits. The parents were confused and frustrated as the battle seemed endless over daily activities. While she began her 2-year-old experience being called the darling of the class because she could run and she could talk, she ended her kindergarten experience also being known as aggressive. Angry eruptions and fighting against the leading of anyone else continued to develop as patterns in her life. The parents maximized their little girl's precocity. She was so smart. Let's make big of it. And they minimized their own struggle. They would make excuses for their daughter and doubt their own parenting ability. They privately read about the strong-willed child and the very smart child searching for answers. They could not bring themselves to share the full extent of their burden of family conflict and chaos with anyone. As incidences of difficult behavior became more frequent in one church and the offer of help and questions about their parenting practices would emerge, they would change churches. They changed schools. They finally moved in the child's early teen years, hoping to remove the young adolescent from bad influences that she had gravitated toward. It took quite a while for the parents to risk involvement in a faith community after they moved. They had experienced their former faith communities as judgmental with the questions of their parenting practices and the offers of advice. The risk of blame and shame was just too costly. Their greatest fear was that it might be true, it was their fault that their child was so hard to manage. They were also struggling from their belief that raising a child should not be this way. They were people of faith. They believed God had provided this child for them, and that God had promised to hear their prayers and to come to their aid. They were trying to raise this child up in the way she should go. So why was it they could not train out of this child the defiance and the emotional outbursts? What was wrong with them? And where was God in this escalating struggle? So that's the story. Where are those faith fractures? First, with the infant. Faith development researchers tell us that faith formation begins with the ability to trust. At birth, the manner in which the newborn's needs are met or unmet sets an expectation in that infant for their world and for what it takes to survive. The experience of warm and welcoming, attentive caregivers to meet the infant's physical needs of feeding and diapering, their emotional needs for comforting and touching, as well as their social needs for gazing into one another's faces, sets an expectation for safety, for security, and for connection. When those physical, emotional, and social needs are not met, infants have been found to experience failure to thrive, which can be life-threatening for infants, or failure to bond, attachment wounds. We humans, I believe, are hardwired to connect with others and with the thou that is larger than ourselves. Since we are set that way, attachment wounds leave us with difficulty in trusting, period. Relationships can turn into using and abusing more than reciprocal collaboration or care or enjoyment. Authority is to be undermined or outsmarted more than understood and respected. Life is more of a battlefield than a journey. There's no thing or no one greater than survival. Second, let's consider the parents' fractures in their faith. Their faith structures were challenged around their beliefs about themselves, their beliefs about a faith community, and their beliefs about God. Their own ability and worthiness were challenged as they compared their parenting experiences to those that they thought they should be having. The repeated struggles in parenting left them with a not good enough self-definition. They were burdened with such self-condemnation that they could not show enough of their difficulties to receive comfort or help. It also seems they believe participants in the faith community were expected to live and show only the perfect and the exceptional. Let's get all dressed up, going to church now, folks. Seems there was the belief that if you act in a particular way, then only good is going to come to you. Only good. Their input, however, did not bring the output their belief or their faith community seemed to promise. The parents' experience of chronic difficulty also brought deep questions about God that their faith system was struggling to make sense of. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, how is it that something as good as adopting a needy child can set up such a life of suffering, especially in someone who believes in God and seeks God's will? Finally, consider the fractures in the faith of the faith community, if I may. There was a fracture ingrained in their belief system, the system that the faith communities that this family had experienced, at any rate. The health and wealth structure of faith seems to have this presupposition: perfection is the goal of life. Maybe that's a new idea for you. I invite you to consider it. When tragedy does not fit in this boxed structure of the life of faithful participants, then the system itself will crack or the participant will. How is shame related to these faith fractures? Shame is essentially the experience of unworthiness, bad, less than, not enough, not ready to be seen. Worthiness can be understood as the sense of our own value, belonging, place in existence. I'm welcome here. I belong here. Loving responses tell me I have value. The infant, lacking that initial welcome, missed her core sense of value and belonging, and was set up to not trust, thus to fight for survival against the very community that wanted to secure her survival. The parents' understanding of faith as appropriate input brings desired outcome. A works righteousness structure of faith set them up to have to earn their worthiness. The faith community's unspoken rule of show the perfect as well as fix it and make it perfect set up the same striving for worthiness that the parents already believed. Value being earned through perfection. Faith communities who promote a perfection as the goal of life faith structure often have a fear response to tragedy or continuous difficulty. Fear sets in to protect the box by explaining, blaming, or not seeing what doesn't fit in the box. Those experiencing tragedy in their midst may be resisted or dismissed, therefore being shamed. What about God? In a works righteousness system, God is contained in do's and don'ts, input and output. When something happens outside of that system, God's character is often brought into question. God is shamed. So what can bring healing when shame fractures our faith structure or our faith communities? Brene Brown, a social researcher and social worker, has studied shame experience extensively. She notes the prevalence of the experience of shame as such that alleviating it is an impossibility. She says, we're not going to get rid of that. It's part of the human condition. In her research, she has discovered ways of navigating the experience of shame without losing one's sense of value or turning to shame another. The kick the dog syndrome. She calls this process developing shame resiliency. The core of shame resilience is the ability to move toward empathy in the face of a shaming experience. Whew. Empathy requires courage. Courage to be honest with ourselves about our own imperfections, places we believe ourselves less than. And it also requires courage to reach for understanding and compassion to offer ourselves. In faith traditions and many faith communities, this reaching involves turning to God in confession of pain and brokenness and missteps, repentance of any part I may have played in that pain or that tragedy, and acceptance of offered comfort and help and forgiveness. That's an empathy experience. When we have received empathy, then we have something to give others. often when we find ourselves looking at another and saying, "Me too. I get you." We're seeing that because we have humbly recognized that we are indeed all imperfect. So how do we apply this faith to faith fractures set up by shame? Here are a few thoughts. Well, maybe there are a few challenges. I dare us to exercise our muscle of self-reflection. Does this experience represent a pattern in my life that I might want to change? Does this experience define me? What does the rest of my life experience tell me about me? And dare to include safe people in those reflections. Who knows me well enough to confirm or challenge my own self-reflections? Who gets me enough to understand how this is a struggle for me? Who can I trust to show me empathy? And dare to converse with our spiritual resources about the troubling experience. What does my faith community have to say about my experience? How do my faith sacred writings speak into this? Is there a spiritual leader, a mentor, or friend that I can consult? And what spiritual practices can I activate with courage and curiosity, openness and vulnerability in the face of the holy other? And finally, dare to challenge our faith communities to break down expectations of perfection and make room for grace. Notice the least of these, and that your faith community has an opportunity to welcome the troubled and burdened who need a welcome and acceptance. Have conversations about what you have noticed, inquiring how your community can offer help and hope. Encourage those with gifts and resources to step up and make that difference. And this may involve you being part of the solution. Learning to be honest with ourselves and with others about our messy places and to tolerate those unanswerable questions and unexplainable experiences are opportunities for adult faith restructuring. Each of us can be the beginning of a new faith structure that welcomes whole people, messy and all, and that leaves room for mystery in a God worthy of worship. Thank you.